President-elect Donald Trump's fantasy draft, the intense search for just the right fit, assembling a team to try to deliver on his campaign promises. This is Special Report. Who is also now his transition manager, went over more names today as they seek to staff some of the crucial jobs in their upcoming administration. Tonight, we know one person who is not interested, and we're hearing names both familiar and new as the delicate process continues. Chief Political Correspondent Carl Cameron is in New York tonight with the very latest. Good evening, Carl.
Hi, Brett, and that wasn't all that happened today. The president-elect Donald Trump got his first full-blown presidential daily briefing. This is identical to what presidents get. It's not the shorter version that Trump and Hillary Clinton both got during the campaign.
Vice President-elect Mike Pence, who replaced New Jersey Governor Chris Christie as head of the transition, returned to Trump Tower to start filling in the roster.
Mr. Vice President?
One of Pence's first duties as transition leader is to sign a key White House document allowing the Obama administration to share information with the Trump transition. It requires Pence's signature now that Christie's gone. Former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani has emerged as a favorite for Secretary of State, brushing off being the Attorney General, former campaign manager Kellyanne Conway.
We know he'd be an incredible Secretary of State. We know that he would represent this country very well around the world as he went to implement Donald Trump's vision.
Trump's campaign finance chairman, Steve Mnuchin, is considered a top pick for Treasury Secretary.
We're working on the economic plan and the transition, making sure we get the biggest tax bill passed, biggest tax changes since Reagan.
Trump's also considering campaign economic advisor Wilbur Ross, a billionaire investor, for Secretary of Commerce. A draft document of Trump's potential trade reform plans over the first 200 days says, quote, the Trump administration will reverse decades of conciliatory trade policy. New trade agreements will be negotiated that provide for the interests of U.S. workers and companies first. Dr. Ben Carson, the first former primary rival to endorse Trump, was angling for Secretary of Health and Human Services and separately being considered for Secretary of Education. Carson has now told the campaign he believes he'd be more helpful to the movement outside the administration. Newt Gingrich is trying to create a new post for himself, a sort of long-term national White House vision coordinator.
You have to have an ability to look beyond the immediate fight and figure out how does that fit the long-term goals, and that's what I really want to focus on.
Incoming White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus is defending soon-to-be senior counselor to the president, Steve Bannon, whose support for alt-right politics has drawn criticism from the left.
The Steve Bannon I know is a guy that is really on the same page with a lot of the almost everything that I agree with as far as advising President-elect Trump. I mean, he was a force for good on the campaign. I haven't seen any of these things that people are crying out about.
Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions, the first senator to endorse Trump and an ardent border security hawk, is a front-runner for defense secretary, but is also being considered as attorney general. Separately, having called the Electoral College a disaster in 2012, the president-elect changed his tune on Twitter overnight. The Electoral College is actually genius in that it brings all states, including smaller ones, into play. Campaigning is much different.
And tomorrow, Vice President-elect Mike Pence visits Washington to meet with congressional leaders and finalize all the necessary paperwork so that the Obama administration and his transition team can share information and really kick the transition off aggressively, Brett.
And Carl, another former primary rival turned supporter also turned up at Trump Tower today.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz made an appearance at Trump Tower, and it did turn heads. They were very bitter primary rivals. Of course, Cruz has reached out and congratulated the president already, but this was a face-to-face meeting and an opportunity, Cruz said, to, on behalf of the 27 million Texans he represents, the senator looks forward to assisting the Trump administration. Don't they all, Brett?
Raise some eyebrows. We'll see what that all means. Carl, thank you. I know on Twitter, at Brett Baier, you can use the hashtag Special Report, or on Facebook at facebook.com/BrettBaierSR. Republicans have picked Paul Ryan to continue as House Speaker in the new Congress. Today, Ryan welcomed his members to what he is calling the dawn of a new unified Republican government. But not everyone will have an equal seat at the big table, and some conservatives may actually be relegated to the bleachers. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is on Capitol Hill tonight with the latest. Good evening, Mike.
Well, Brett, good evening. After talk throughout the 2016 campaign of Republicans fighting with one another, several House Republican members tell me their conference meeting this afternoon was peaceful, even like a honeymoon. And this afternoon, the entire House Republican Conference, Speaker Paul Ryan, Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Majority Whip Steve Scalise, and Conference Chair Cathy McMorris Rodgers were all reelected behind closed doors unanimously without opposition. It is the start of a new era on Capitol Hill, with Republicans about to lead both the legislative and executive branches. And Ryan says to Americans worried about their future, Congress will respond by getting the big things done.
We hear you, and we are here to fix problems. We're very excited to get to work. This leadership team is unified. This entire House Republican Conference is unified.
With incoming President-elect Donald Trump, it appears he is setting the agenda, and the Conservative Freedom Caucus and outside groups like Heritage Action, known for pushing lawmakers to vote a certain way, are likely to lose some influence. Last night, a key Freedom Caucus member who led the push to oust John Boehner as Speaker signaled he's ready for unity behind Ryan.
As long as we keep the agenda going the way it is, I certainly plan to support him.
In terms of issues lawmakers are looking to tackle immediately, President-elect Trump ran on securing the southern border. There's been debate about whether it will be an actual physical wall or whether it will be fencing and technology to stop the flow of illegal immigrants. Majority Leader McCarthy praised the president-elect for being first to respond to the American people.
He became their voice. This leadership team has had the wisdom to listen. Now we have the courage to lead. You'll see a new Congress with a new approach, and one that will start getting the work done on the very first day.
Another huge priority for the president-elect and Republicans on Capitol Hill is repealing and replacing Obamacare. GOP leaders say the popular components helping those with pre-existing conditions obtain insurance and allowing young adults to stay on their parents' plans will continue with a GOP replacement. Moments ago, Majority Leader McCarthy and the House GOP chairman sent a letter to the Obama administration asking that any pending rules or regulations not be finalized in the final days of President Obama's term in office. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill tonight. Mike, thank you. The president of the University of Virginia is defending her use of quotations from the school's founder, Thomas Jefferson, in discussing the presidential election. A group of students and professors insist Teresa Sullivan's citation of Jefferson's words undermines her message of unity and equality because he was a slave owner. Sullivan says quoting Jefferson does not imply she agrees with all of his actions. A Southwest Airlines employee was shot and killed near a parking garage at Oklahoma City's Will Rogers World Airport today. City officials closed that airport and ordered people inside a sprawling terminal to seek shelter. Video from television station helicopters showed what appeared to be a pool of blood near the bottom of a ramp leading from the airport's departure area. By late afternoon, police said they did not believe there was an active shooter on site. Since then, no suspect has been found. President Obama is distancing himself from any responsibility for the election of Donald Trump. You heard some of that earlier in James's piece. The outgoing president is on his final foreign tour, and he's getting a lot of questions about how last week's election could have happened. Correspondent Kevin Cork reports tonight from Athens, Greece.
In what's become an all-too-familiar scene in modern Greece, the streets of historic Athens were marred by demonstrations tonight. Protesters marching, at least in part, against the visit of President Obama, the first American president to come to the country in 17 years. The unrest in stark contrast to the president's arrival ceremony, but in many ways a symbolic reflection of the unease here, especially about the U.S. role in Europe under a Trump presidency. Those concerns forcing Mr. Obama into the awkward role of ambassador for a man he once said was unfit for the presidency. And now the president is left fielding questions about whether or not he feels responsible for the rise of Donald Trump.
Earlier this year, Matt Lauer asked you if you believed you helped create the environment for Donald Trump to run.
Talk to me if he wins. Then we'll have a conversation about how responsible I feel about it.
I wonder, do you feel any responsibility for the election of Donald Trump?
Well, first of all, I think it's fair to say that I was surprised by the election results. I've said so. I still don't feel responsible for what the president-elect says or does. but I do feel a responsibility as President of the United States to make sure that I facilitate a good transition.
Comments like this.
It's obsolete, and we're spending too much, and everyone's ripping us off. You have 28 countries, they're ripping us off.
Then candidate Trump's view of NATO, just one of many areas concerning European leaders.
It continues to be a cornerstone of our security that is unwavering. It is something that provides significant continuity, even as we see a transition of governments in the United States.
Including future U.S. positions on security partnerships, establishing and honoring deals on trade and the climate, the fight against ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and the migrant refugee crisis, which has hit Greece particularly hard. For some, concern has given way to a wait-and-see attitude.
What we should be doing is build bridges, not walls.
Brett, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says that Europe needs strong American leadership in the face of the greatest threat to Western security in a generation. A not-so-veiled reference to an increasingly aggressive Russia, the same Russia that President-elect Trump has suggested he'd like to improve relations with. Brett?
Kevin Corke traveling with the president in Athens, Greece. Kevin, thank you. The Justice Department is siding with a group of Virginia drivers whose licenses were suspended by the state because they have not paid their court costs and fines. The class action lawsuit contends this violates due process guarantee in the Constitution. A legal aid group says nearly 1 million Virginians have suspended licenses because of this practice. The Commonwealth has not commented. Another black mark for veterans care in Arizona. An inspector general's report says the Southern Arizona VA healthcare system manipulates wait time data. It says employees offer veterans the next available appointment date, then document the scheduled date as the veteran's desired care date. VA officials have apologized for past practices and say they are making improvements. Ford's CEO says the automaker is moving ahead with plans to shift production of small cars out of Michigan to Mexico. Donald Trump was very critical of the plan during the campaign, but Ford chief Mark Fields says no jobs will be lost in Michigan because the plant will make 2 other vehicles there. Another record high for the Dow today. The industrial average gained 54. The S&P 500 finished ahead 16. The Nasdaq jumped 57 in what has been a good string for the markets. We're hearing more tonight from corporate America about the upcoming Trump presidency. Fox Business Network senior Washington correspondent Peter Barnes is live tonight at the Four Seasons Hotel, where big business has the floor at the Wall Street Journal's annual meeting of its CEO Council. Good evening, Peter.
Well, good evening, Brett. Representatives of both parties in Congress, as well as the incoming Trump administration, addressed about 100 CEOs last night and today as they try to figure out what kind of policies might be coming out of Washington following the election. As a group, it turns out these CEOs did not want Donald Trump as president. The Wall Street Journal asked them who they voted for. 50% said Hillary Clinton, 38% said Mr. Trump, 12% said Gary Johnson. None of them voted for Jill Stein. So they had lots of questions for these policymakers about the future of taxes, tax reform, changes in trade deals possibly, as well as repealing and replacing Obamacare. Senator Elizabeth Warren, the Senate Democratic Progressive, one of the leaders there, addressed the CEOs today as well. And of course, she ripped in to the president-elect, especially over his decision to make Breitbart Executive Chair Steve Bannon a senior advisor in his administration in January. Critics charge that the conservative website is part of the alternative right, alt-right movement, which includes some white nationalists.
You know, here I am with the business leaders of America, and I just want to underline something that every one of you know. Bigotry is bad for business.
Former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, a Trump advisor, however, addressed the group last night, and he said that as long as he has known Steve Bannon, he has not found him to be at all racist or anti-Semitic, and he said he's just got very strong conservative views and that he will be a good advisor to President Trump.
When you're out there just criticizing, it's one thing. When you actually get on the inside, there's a certain weight of responsibility for the American people that is on your shoulders. And I think Steve Bannon is the kind of guy who gets that.
Now on actual policy, one of House Speaker Paul Ryan's top lieutenants, Kevin Brady, the congressman who's chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, said that House Republicans have spent a lot of time already on tax reform and repealing and replacing Obamacare and are ready to get to work with Mr. Trump. Brett?
Peter Barnes, live at the Four Seasons in Georgetown. Peter, thank you. Up next, what needs to be done to protect you from some of your own electronic devices? First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox West Dakota, as the company building the Dakota Access Pipeline goes to court to get permission to finish that project. Yesterday, we told you the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said more study is needed. Opponents say the pipeline threatens drinking water and cultural sites. Fox 5, our affiliate in Atlanta, as a Georgia man faces life in prison after he was convicted of malice murder in the death of his toddler son, who was left in a hot car for hours. A jury found Ross Harris guilty on all 8 counts against him. The malice murder conviction means jurors ultimately agreed with prosecutors that Harris left his 22-month-old son to die on purpose. And this is a live look at Houston from our affiliate Fox 26. One of the big stories there tonight, Texas lawmakers file several proposals to decriminalize the possession of small amounts of marijuana. This follows voter approval of similar measures in 4 states last week. No comment yet from Republican Governor Greg Abbott. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Britain has approved the extradition of an alleged computer hacker accused of snatching data from the Pentagon. That suspect faces 99 years in prison if convicted. The problems of cyber theft and cyber terrorism are some of the most pressing concerns for the next administration. Tonight, what needs to be done to keep the bad guys from using your own devices against you? Here's Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge.
Last month's denial of service attack, what web experts call a DDoS attack, shut down some of the web's most popular sites, sending a chill through the U.S. intelligence community. Cyber experts say these attacks are at an all-time high, with hackers using everyday items such as video security cameras, routers, and printers to jam the Internet's main switchboards.
Over this time last year, 30% more DDoS attacks than last year. Also, the attacks are much larger right now, 1,000 times larger than this time last year. So this is very serious.
The National Institute of Standards and Technology, an office within the Commerce Department, announced new recommendations today, urging manufacturers to build in security features at the design level so that these Wi-Fi-enabled devices cannot be hijacked.
You want to stop the bad guys when you can, but if they do get in, and we also have decades of threat data which show you can't stop all cyber attacks. So when they get in, can we limit the damage they can do once they're in?
New research shows the depth and breadth of the cyber threat facing the next administration. Last summer, a breach at the Office of Personnel Management affected millions of government security clearance holders and compromised 21.5 million Social Security numbers. The U.S. Army, IRS, and unclassified State Department systems were also compromised. And that was months before the DNC, DCCC, and WikiLeaks election-related hacks. On Monday, the Homeland Security Secretary urged the Trump team to remain focused on cyber threats impacting critical systems, such as the power grid. But history tells a different story.
The good news is there's more awareness. The bad news is there's a change in administration coming, and historically, going back at least to the Carter administration, every new change of administration means people forget about the cyber threat.
The immediate solution to the denial of service attacks using everyday household items may include service providers and a change in the contract allowing them to debug devices for malicious software. But experts pointed out today that there's a lot of risk for the companies and legislation might be required. Brett.
Kevin, thank you. German law enforcement conducted massive raids today in 60 cities targeting an Islamic group suspected of radicalizing teenagers for attacks in Iraq and Syria. Reporter Kitty Logan has details of the crackdown.
It's the biggest crackdown of its kind in Germany in 2 decades. Police enforcing a ban put in place today on a group calling itself True Religion, an organisation which the German government says is encouraging radical extremism and supporting terrorism. German Interior Minister Thomas de Maizière wants these mass raids to send a clear message.
We do not want terrorism in Germany. We do not want the promotion of terrorism in Germany and the radicalization for it. And we also do not want to export terrorism.
There were no arrests, but police seized files and documents. They also found a number of weapons, including knives and tasers. And these copies of the Quran, which authorities say the group distributed, along with extremist propaganda, accusing them of misusing their religion to incite hatred. There is heightened concern in Germany about the threat of ISIS-inspired terrorism, highlighted when police arrested a Syrian man in eastern Germany last month and discovered bomb-making equipment in his home. German Interior Minister emphasized there was no imminent threat from this newly banned group, but clearly authorities are leaving nothing to chance. Brett?
Kitty Logan in London. Kitty, thank you. Hundreds of Iraqi citizens spilled into the streets today in eastern Mosul, areas recently retaken from ISIS terrorists. They are demanding food from the military as supplies run low. In other parts of the city, ISIS terrorists are firing mortars from apartment windows as Iraqi special forces wage fierce urban combat. The world is getting more dangerous, and the U.S. is not keeping up. That is the conclusion of a new report on the American military. Pentagon producer Lucas Tomlinson takes a look.
Go, 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 go. The bad news, threats to the U.S. have increased in the past year. But what's worse, the U.S. military's ability to respond to them has decreased significantly. This assessment, according to a new report from the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation. An advanced copy obtained by Fox News shows decades of wear and tear to equipment combined with sharp budget cuts, exacerbated in recent years by congressionally mandated cuts known as sequestration, have left an American military in rapid decline.
It's not a good trajectory. We're weaker than we were a year ago. Our competitors are better than they were a year ago, and it's going to take a long time and lots of investment to correct that situation.
The report concludes, as currently postured, the U.S. military is only marginally able to meet the demands of defending America's vital national interests. Hotspots like in the Middle East and Iran continue to be the state actor most hostile to American interests.
All of our major competitors, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and terror elements in the Middle East and elsewhere, have doubled down on their investments, improving their military capabilities, developing new weapon systems. So they're getting more aggressive and better, and we're in decline.
In Washington this week, Defense Secretary Ash Carter acknowledged the growing threats abroad.
Our enemies and our potential enemies are extremely competitive. It's not going to be 1945 again, where the rest of the world is in ruins and the United States is the only power left standing.
The Defense Department's budget has been cut by over $100 billion since 2001, which is why Secretary Carter is continuing to push for more defense funding. Brett?
Lucas, what are you hearing about Russia's actions in Syria today?
Brett, today Russia significantly increased its military escalation in Syria, launching cruise missiles from a frigate in the eastern Mediterranean, which officials here tell me struck targets in Aleppo, once Syria's most populated city, and breaking a 3-week-old ceasefire. Over 200,000 civilians are trapped in Aleppo, surrounded by Syrian regime troops. This Russian defense video released shows the cruise missile strike in addition to MiG-29 fighter jets launching from Russia's only aircraft carrier off the coast of Syria. Officials tell me these moves are for show, saying that Russia could easily launch strikes using the more than 24 strike aircraft already based in Syria, striking Syrian rebels, some of whom are backed by the United States. Brett?
Lucas Tomlinson live at the Pentagon. Lucas, thank you. President-elect Donald Trump said to be closing in on hiring a few good men and perhaps women. Will update the transition with the panel after a quick timeout.
This leadership team is unified. This entire House Republican conference is unified. And we are so eager to get to work with our new president-elect to fix America's pressing problems.
It would be an honor to serve the country again, but ultimately this is the president-elect's decision. I don't think it's appropriate to talk about it in public. In God's good time, he'll make up his mind.
Well, first of all, I won't be Attorney General.
You won't be Attorney General.
So good, I won't have to decide that one,
okay.
Thank God.
Made that clear.
So I can escape that one.
I should ask Jeff Sessions that question, should I?
Wouldn't be a bad idea, but I don't know who's going to be Attorney General.
The choice for Secretary of State in the Trump administration is down to Rudolph Giuliani and John Bolton.
John would be a very good choice.
Is there anybody better?
Maybe me, I don't know.
Rudy Giuliani talking to the Wall Street Journal. We're told that Rudy Giuliani could have pretty much any position he wants after being such an integral part of the Trump campaign. We will see where he ends up. He is being talked about at the State Department. A new name surfacing today for potentially at the Defense Department, and that is Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas. He is a possibility. We've also heard, as we reported here, Senator Kelly Ayotte, who just lost her Senate bid in New Hampshire. And there are a list of names. This is the time when you're looking at names, and we'll see what we can nail down. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Julie Pace, White House correspondent for the Associated Press. Mercedes Schlapp, columnist for the Washington Times. And Jonathan Swan, national political reporter for The Hill. All right, Jonathan, it's funny to hear Giuliani talk like that. It's so candid, or not so candid. What are your thoughts on the transition and how close they are to getting these big names nailed down?
My sources say that it's unlikely there'll be announcements this week. It's not impossible. They're probably going to happen next week. But there's a few people. You said something there which is absolutely correct, which is there's a few people in Trump's orbit there that people say whatever they want, they basically get. Jeff Sessions is one of those people. It's, you know, people have been floating different agencies like Defense, Homeland Security, and I was talking to a source today in Trump's inner circle, and they said whatever Jeff Sessions wants, Jeff Sessions will get. So I think Rudy Giuliani is a bit more complicated. There's some good names in there for Secretary of State, and one thing I reported today was that Sheldon Adelson, who's a big donor, he's been pushing very strongly for Rudy Giuliani and John Bolton. He likes both of those guys.
And I've heard Bob Corker's name, yep. Mercedes. I've heard David Petraeus' name mentioned for state.
Well, I think what you're learning in this transition period is the fact that there's many voices involved, many influencers. There would be the Trump children, obviously Jared, the son-in-law, Bannon, Kellyanne Conway. They're all really having this impact on who will be placed in these top positions. And I think that's important to point out, because as we're finding, it's not necessarily a very clean process. It's a bit chaotic. There's a lot of strong opinions on where people should go. I think to the case of Giuliani, he has been with Trump through good, bad, ugly. And so he obviously will be favored to maybe be at the Department of State. I thought for Giuliani it would make sense for him to move on with either Department of Homeland Security or Attorney General, but obviously he put that off the table pretty quickly.
Julie.
Well, I think what you learn in transitions is that it's better to be behind the scenes than to be out front. What I think has been so unusual is how many people are out there actually talking about themselves in jobs. Normally,
it's shocking, right?
It's unbelievable. Normally, if you are thought to be in the mix for a top job, you do everything you can to not be out there.
Go out of town.
You leave town. You send your wife and kids on vacation. You do not want to be in the mix. But as we know with Trump, it's a very different process. Sometimes people communicate to him through television. So for some of these people, it might not be a bad idea to be out there so much.
So it reminds us a little bit about like The Apprentice, you know, maybe something. I don't know. But he is a businessman, and he's going to figure out who's the best position to get his ideas and campaign promises across the finish line. Chris Christie was not that person, and he was moved aside. Pence put in the transition spot, and it's being portrayed as some just normal evolution. It seems more than that, the changes that have been happening.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, it was clear from the beginning, from the moment he picked Mike Pence, that if Donald Trump were elected president, he would rely heavily on Pence, both his experience in Washington, his experience as a policymaker. And I think we're seeing that right now very clearly. I mean, Mike Pence is running the process. Everybody reports to Mike Pence, and then they'll take these decisions to Donald Trump. I think it's true that there are some people who basically have their pick, but for everybody else, there's this sort of mad scramble. And it is funny to see people doing it in politicking in the open. You've had people who are politicking quietly. I mean, people who are, you know, having their surrogates make phone calls to important people who they think can influence the decision. I mean, the poor people who are named to the executive committee and the vice chairs. Probably voicemails are all full now because everybody's lobbying to get one of these jobs. But Mike Pence is very clearly in charge.
We rarely hear from the 43rd president of the United States, but he weighed in on this election today.
People become very frustrated. They become angry. They become frustrated in their lives. And that gets reflected in the political process. And I think that's part of what was taking place during this recent election. I understand anger, and some people might have been angry when I was president. But anger shouldn't drive policy. What needs to drive policy is what's best for the people who are angry.
Another president, Jonathan, who won the Electoral College. And he obviously dealt with a situation with the Iraq War that he was facing a lot of pushback.
Yeah, and it's interesting now, you speak to people in Trump's orbit and there's almost a glee with which they have, obviously in public they're, accepting the warm words of the Bushes after the election, the Romneys, but there's a real glee that they've destroyed the Bush wing of the Republican Party. And I think foreign policy is just one of the areas that we're going to see the most interesting action in. And Steve Bannon, you should watch for him to have a big role in national security and foreign policy. Everyone just talks about him on a domestic level, but this is someone who's got very big ideas for America's role in the world.
Julie, Rand Paul was out today pushing back on John Bolton very hard, saying it doesn't fit with Donald Trump's, how he talked about foreign policy on the trail.
And I think what you learn from that, what we should take away from that, is that even though Donald Trump is going to have a Republican Senate and a Republican House, his nominations and eventually his policy positions are not going to be a cakewalk. There are still divisions within the Republican Party that were not solved by this election. And you have some folks in the party who are more isolationist. You have some who are more hawkish. And he is going to have to try to strike that balance. And I think it's going to be a real challenge for him, especially as someone who does not have a lot of experience with the workings of Congress.
I want to just quickly, Mercedes, talk about Barbara Boxer's efforts. The Electoral College. She said the Electoral College is an outdated, undemocratic system that does not reflect our modern society, and it needs to change immediately. Every American should be guaranteed that their vote counts. Uphill battle for Democrats.
Absolutely. I think that you would go to any of these smaller states who would argue against changing the Electoral College, because if not, what you would see is candidates simply campaigning in the urban big city areas in California, in Texas, where there's a lot of population. So that idea will go nowhere.
And Donald Trump agrees with you now. Electoral College is actually genius in that it brings all states, including the smaller ones, into play. Campaigning is much different. So that's settled as far as the president-elect is concerned. Next up, the future of the Democratic Party and what's next on Capitol Hill. Well, that was President Obama in Greece, following up on his news conference yesterday at the White House. We're back with the panel. The state of the Democratic Party, it seems to be they're trying to find a way, Mercedes. They've delayed the election of the leadership in Congress and trying to figure out where to go.
Right. It's a soul-searching party right now. And I think that for the Democrats in Congress, I mean, Pelosi has led the Democrats for 12 years. What we have seen this year has been a change election. And will the Democrats follow suit? And there's this real resistance coming from Pelosi and the establishment Democrats that we're going to keep moving forward, business as usual. And then you have Tim Ryan thinking about running from Ohio and saying we need to reach out to the blue-collar workers. So I think for the Democrats, they're in a very, I think they still have not, it's like shell shock. They still have not realized that they're stuck, that they really did not win over those blue-collar workers, and that they will probably need to make those substantial changes.
Julie, Bill McGurn with the Wall Street Journal writes, a Clinton-free Democratic Party, and he usually nails these things. This one I think he did. For the Democrats, the defeat of the Clintons should be liberating. The departure of the Clintons opens the door for other Democrats, including Democratic governors not yet in office, who would never have had a prayer so long as Bill and Hillary dominated the show. I talked to a lot of Democrats who thought that was the problem from the beginning, was that the party could never breathe with the Clinton kind of operation hanging over it.
Basically, from the minute that President Obama won re-election in 2012, Democrats were moving toward the idea of Hillary Clinton being their nominee this time around. That's an incredibly stifling thing to have hanging over a party. It really is a warning shot to anybody else who might have looked to step up. And if she had won, again, this is a silver lining in what has been a bad election season for Democrats, so I don't want to act as though this is a real positive out there. But if they can take away something from it, it's that there is now an open playing field. If you are a younger Democrat, if you come from a state that might not be looked at, if you have a background that might be more unusual for a Democratic nominee, this is your chance. You have running room, and people should look to take advantage of that.
Jonathan, but for the people running for chairman of the party, Keith Ellison, Congressman, and Howard Dean, former chairman, that's not exactly moderating the Democratic Party.
No, and I think that we're going to see a lot more attention playing out, because when you talk to establishment Democrats, more centrist Democrats, they sort of treat the left like their pet alligators. It's like, let's not provoke them too much. Let's kind of give them a few things, feed them a little things. Maybe Keith Ellison can be DNC chair, but you've still got Chuck Schumer running the Senate. I mean,
one day those alligators really grow.
Right, exactly. And one day you'll get a Trump-sized alligator on the left. Like, it's going to happen.
Steve,
I think you have to go back even further. I mean, if you remember how Barack Obama ran for president, he ran unapologetically as somebody who was a proponent of activist government. He wanted to make liberalism cool again. He said this in interviews. He said, I want young people to think that working for the government is a cool thing. We're going to embrace our big government liberalism. And that came after decades of Democrats being identity politics driven, and before that, class warfare driven. And I think what Obama did was temporarily paper over those two poles, those tensions between identity politics Democrats and class warfare Democrats. And we're starting to see it again. I think it's the natural outgrowth of this kind of election, where they were so badly beaten among blue-collar workers and, you know, what were thought of as Reagan Democrats.
But Julie, to hear the president say perhaps the view of the American people is that we just need to shake things up. I mean, 2010, 2012, 2014, and now 2016, 2/3 of the state legislatures, Republican. House and Senate, Republican. 34 governors, Republican. I mean, that's not just shaking things up. That is dramatically turning the country.
It absolutely is. And I think there's this interesting comparison between Obama and Trump. Obama is aligned with the Democratic Party on a lot of policy positions, and the Democratic Party has embraced him in a way that Republicans did not embrace Trump for much of his campaign. But these are two people who essentially ran as singular political figures. So it leaves us in a bit of a confusing situation right now, where you actually have the majority of the country that approves of Barack Obama, and yet you have Democrats that are so decimated. Trump is now going to face a very similar situation. He is now being embraced by much of the Republican Party, but he is separate from the Republicans. He is his own political figure, and in some ways it's this weird commonality between these two just incredibly different men.
Meantime, Mercedes, Democrats are unified on one thing, and that is Steve Bannon. They are going after what the president-elect, Donald Trump, named as his senior counselor and strategist. Here's Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid today, and John Cornyn.
As long as a champion of racial division is a step away from the Oval Office, it will be impossible to take Trump's efforts to heal the nation seriously.
We used to call people like that sore losers. But frankly, what he does is also contribute to the coarsening of our discourse and debate here in the United States Senate.
Now, Steve Bannon, as I mentioned, senior counselor and chief strategist, announced by President-elect Trump, obviously former head of Breitbart, and also ran really the campaign from the inside, the Donald Trump campaign. Here is Alan Dershowitz defending Steve Bannon.
Is he supported by bigots? Yes, he is. But to show you an analogy, if Keith Ellison, who's a decent, good person, were to be appointed the head of the Democratic National Committee, Hamas would support it, would cheer and yell, because he has had some association with Farrakhan in the past. Look, I don't know whether he's an anti-Semite or not. I just don't think you should toss that phrase around casually.
And people are.
Well,
Mercedes?
I think the Democrats in this election, one of the biggest problems that they've had is the name calling towards the Trump supporters, whether it would be deplorable, racist, sexist. I mean, the list goes on and on.
I mean, it did go both ways.
It did go, but it was a lot of the fact in so many television interviews where if you were a Trump supporter, easy answer would be you're a racist, you're a sexist because you support Donald Trump. And I think for Steve Bannon, the difficulty has been that he has come across being a controversial figure in a lot of ways, but you know, the people who I know that have worked closely with Bannon will defend him till the end and say he is not a racist, he is pro-Israel. What he understands clearly is the culture of America, this populist movement, this need for a nation state, and I think that's the Bannon that we will see in the White House.
But a big target for Democrats.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I've done extensive reporting on Steve Bannon, and that reporting has included talking to people who used to work for him at Breitbart, who loathe and despise him. I spoke to 3 of them yesterday. All three said they've never heard him say an anti-Semitic comment, and that's in my story. So, you know, this stuff's really important, these label words that we throw at people. It's really, really important, and the only piece of evidence people seem to have is something in a divorce proceedings that he denies.
Panel, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Did you see Tucker Carlson last night? It was his first night. It's really good. Tucker Carlson Tonight starts right now.